Good evening. The country tonight is in the midst of what may be the most serious constitutional crisis in its history. The president has fired the special Watergate prosecutor, Archibald Cox. Because of the president's action, the attorney general has resigned. Elliot Richardson has quit, saying he cannot carry out Mr. Nixon's instructions. All of this adds up to a totally unprecedented situation, a grave and profound crisis in which the president has set himself against his own Attorney General and the Department of Justice. Nothing like this has ever happened before.
In 1973, Elliot Richardson's role in the Watergate scandal prevented Richard Nixon from covering up his abuse of power and saved the nation from losing faith in the government.
His actions preserved the integrity of the office of Attorney General, while many other parts of the executive branch were swept up in the scandal.
As leader of the Department of Justice, Elliot Richardson stood up to the President of the United States to hinder the abuse of power by the Nixon administration.
Over 40 years later, Richardson's actions reverberate through today's politicians. Elliot Lee Richardson was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1920 and received a bachelor's degree from Harvard in 1941.
I think he was very affected by his school days. His school had the motto, "Dare to be true." And he held that up as a value that he was going to keep really all of his life, and especially his political career.
I mean, I thought he was a superhero. It was nothing at all surprising to me that he would always do the right thing.
After serving in World War II and being a part of the Normandy Beach invasion and receiving a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, Richardson attended Harvard Law School and graduated in 1947. He was a law clerk and served in various Massachusetts government positions before Nixon chose him as Undersecretary of State in 1969, then Secretary of Department of Health, Education, and Welfare from 1970 to 1973. He was appointed Nixon's Secretary of Defense in 1973 and soon after was appointed Attorney General.
On June 17, 1972, 5 men were arrested for breaking into the Watergate complex and Democratic National Committee offices and attempting to bug them.
The Nixon administration denied involvement with the break-in, but the FBI reported that the operation came from the political sabotage involved in Nixon's re-election campaign. Despite the scandal that November, Nixon was re-elected by one of the biggest landslides ever.
In April of 1973, Nixon requested the resignations of his top advisors, H.R. Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, John Dean, and John Mitchell, due to their involvement in the scandal, along with the Attorney General Richard Kleindienst. Elliot Richardson stepped into the role of Attorney General due to this event. His one condition was for the Watergate investigation to remain separate from the White House.
Well, you're the man, you're my man, and by God, we back you up all to the hilt. Do you understand that? I do. I think I can do it right. I really do. Of course you can. Do what you want, and I'll back you to the hilt. I don't give a damn what you do. I am for you. Do you understand? Get to the bottom of this.
As the Senate Watergate Committee began televised hearings, Elliot Richardson named Archibald Cox as special prosecutor.
Mr. Cox will have full independence as far as I'm concerned. He has been given, or will be given, upon his appointment, full authority to investigate all aspects of the Watergate case itself and other related matters.
Prosecutor Cox demanded the presidential tape recordings of Oval Office and telephone conversations. Nixon refused to turn them over.
On October 20th, 1973, Nixon initiated what became known as the Saturday Night Massacre.
There are reports tonight that President Nixon has ordered Attorney General Elliot Richardson to fire the special Watergate prosecutor Archibald Cox. Cox opposes President Nixon's plan to release summaries of the presidential tapes in the Watergate case. Cox said at a news conference today he'll continue his court efforts to get the tapes, despite the president's orders that he give up that court fight.
Richardson resigned rather than unjustly dismiss Cox. The Deputy Attorney General, Bill Ruckelshaus, did the same. It was left to Ruckelshouse's next in line, Solicitor General Robert Bork, to do Nixon's bidding and fire Cox.
After Cox was fired, Nixon ordered the FBI to occupy Richardson's and Ruckelshouse's former offices. He disbanded the Special Prosecution Staff and returned the investigation to the Justice Department Criminal Division, defying the promised independence of the investigation from the White House.
The President, at that point, thought he had no choice but to direct the Attorney General to discharge Mr. Cox. And I, given my role in guaranteeing the independence of the Special Prosecutor, as well as my belief in the public interests embodied in that role, felt equally clear that I could not discharge him. And so I resigned.
And I remember there was a flash that came across that said Elliot Richardson had resigned, and I remember telling my parents that. You know, they came back and they were like, "What?" And I go, "Yeah, they just said he resigned to protest the firing of Archibald Cox, or that Nixon wanted him to fire." I mean, I was young, but I remember thinking it was a big deal.
He always said it was never a difficult decision. Nixon gave my father a hard time for creating a problem. Don't you have any concern for the national interest? How could you do this at this time? And like my father said, "Well, Mr. President, it's clear that you and I have a different idea of what is in the national interest."
The public exploded with accusations of abuse of power and cries for impeachment. Following this, Nixon maintained his innocence and delivered his famous statement,
"People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook."
In April of 1974, in the case of the United States versus Nixon, the Supreme Court ruled that the president had to give up transcripts of the subpoenaed tapes. On the eve of being impeached, Nixon resigned.
Elliot Richardson took a stand in history by staying true to the principles of democracy when those around him were not. He displayed integrity in the face of dishonesty, following his own moral code rather than following Nixon's orders. His sense of duty to the American people never wavered, even when the president's loyalties were questionable.
Elliot Richardson was later awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Bill Clinton for his public service and role in preserving the integrity of the Watergate investigation.
And of course, as Attorney General, where on one difficult Saturday night, he saved the nation from a constitutional crisis with his courage and moral clarity.
Richardson has set a precedent for those in government, one of rectitude and decency, one that follows the codes of justice.
I think on the radio today you hear him most mentioned because of his effectiveness in resigning and having the resignation leading to the impeachment and resignation of President Nixon.
His legacy, I would hope, be that he is an example in his integrity that he demonstrated so dramatically in the Saturday Night Massacre. The Saturday Night Massacre was a stand where other people perhaps may not have been willing to sacrifice their own personal interests and ambitions for the sake of the Constitution and the American people, which is what he did in that case.
Twice during the spring of 2017, the nation has been reminded of Elliot Richardson's legacy of integrity. First, Acting Attorney General Sally Yates refused to defend President Trump's ban on refugees and was fired soon after.
Then, FBI Director James Comey was fired as well.
It's my judgment that I was fired because of the Russia investigation.
Comey is known for his integrity and has vowed to defend the Constitution.
Having prosecuted the Watergate case and seen obstruction up close, I could say this is exactly the same thing. Firing Comey is exactly what happened when you fire Archibald Cox, the special prosecutor.
Elliot Richardson's legacy has served as a symbol of truth and justice for those in government and American citizens.
Elliot Richardson, standing up to scandal by stepping down.